everyone is joining in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Buying with Impact, Social Procurement Momentum in Canada. I am Jigar Kanjani, Professional Development Program Coordinator at Supply Chain Canada West, and I'm excited to guide you through today's conversation. We still have a few people coming in. It's great. While everyone is joining in, we'll start by sharing a quick highlight from our recent supply chain sustainability event that happened in Vancouver last month. Tori, can we please roll the video?
Really excited to be here to kick off our first in-person event this year. And it was so important for us to talk and focus on the topic of sustainability and the intersection with supply chain management. For many of you who are in supply chain, we all recognize the importance of supply chain to the strategic outcomes of an organization. And for those that are in sustainability, you recognize the importance of sustainability to our overall communities and how we affect the communities around us and the environment around us as well. And where I've seen us do some amazing work is when we're able to bring these two together, because supply chains can truly affect and drive sustainability performance.
Thanks for that, Tori. What you just saw was a glimpse of our supply chain sustainability event in Vancouver, where industry leaders tackled a big question: how do we create supply chains that not only drive efficiency, but also protect our planet? It was a powerful conversation, and it doesn't stop there. We have got more exciting events lined up this year, so feel free to check our events page. And if time permits, I'll share details of some exciting opportunities later in the webinar. All right, great to see so many of you joining us today. For those just joining, welcome again to today's webinar on Buying with Impact, Social Procurement Momentum in Canada. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes to ensure you make the most of today's session. Firstly, the webinar is being recorded and all registrants will receive a recording and presentation slides afterwards. So there is no need to take notes unless you want to. For SCMP holders present here today, if you are an Alberta member, your CPD credits will be automatically added. If you are from outside of Alberta, please remember to manually add your credits in your Supply Chain Canada portal. All attendees are in listen-only mode to avoid background noise. However, we have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So feel free to submit your questions anytime using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you're not able to find it, you can also drop your questions in the chat box. I think that covers the logistics. Now let's dive into why we are here today. Um, every purchase decisions that we make has a ripple effect, not just on cost, but on jobs, on community, and environment. Here's a staggering fact. Canadian federal government spends $20 billion annually on goods and services, and it's only gonna rise. Another eye-opening fact, $100 spent on a local business, 63 would stay in the community, and likewise, if it is a multinational company, only $14 stays, which says a lot more. It's not just an ethical choice, it's an economical and social opportunity amid this tariff war, especially. And so social procurement is moving from isolated pilot projects to mainstream adoption in Canada. And it is very important to create economic, social, and environmental impact without compromising business needs. Now that we understand why social procurement is crucial, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Our speaker for today is Tori Williamson, Chief Operating Officer at Buy Social Canada. an organization dedicated to helping businesses, governments, and institutions harness procurement as a tool for positive change. As CEO at BiSocial Canada, Tori leads national social procurement initiatives, working with cities, corporations, and institutions to integrate social value into purchasing strategies. She currently spearheads the Winnipeg Sustainable Procurement Action Plan, Edmonton's Sustainable Procurement Tools and Procedures, and the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative. With that, let's jump right into today's discussion. Tori, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Jigar. It's so great to be here with everyone today. So Jigar gave a great introduction to some of my work, but I'll give you a little bit more of some context and background about the organization that I work with. So BiSocial Canada isn't just a normal consulting business, we're a social enterprise. So that means that we have a mission as well as sell goods and services and reinvesting the majority of our profits into those services. And our mission is to recognize the potential that purchasing has to transform our economy and our communities. So much of what we see around us happens through business. And so that power can be leveraged in your purchasing, and it can be aligned with your organization's strategic goals. And I'm going to go through that today. Now, for me personally, a little bit about myself and my background. I studied economics in university, and I loved learning about how decisions were made and how things kind of worked when it comes to resources and decision making. But I felt a little bit disenchanted with the models that I was taught in school. So I worked in a couple of different areas: tourism, marketing, logistics. And then I read a fantastic book called Donut Economics. It's 7 new models of economic thinking for the 21st century. And it reflects right back at me in its introduction, that experience that I have of not feeling like the models that we are taught really applied and had positive outcomes. They didn't feel like they were fixing anything, and they were based on a lot of assumptions. And so the initial model that's proposed in the donut is that we must live within the ecological restraints and constraints of the earth to support life. So things like biodiversity, climate, ocean acidification, as well as meet all the needs and social rights of people on the planet. So housing, income, political voice, creativity. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we're not doing a very good job. We're overreaching and under-delivering. So we need to be working towards how to operate in that safe and just donut. And that really resonated with me. I was like, wow, this is something that I think we can work on actively, but how are we going to do that? And so one of the other models in the book is, what is the purpose of business? The purpose of business is profit maximization. We're going to be blowing that donut up out of the water. But if we recognize that business is a potential tool to support communities, environment, people, what can be possible? And so that brought me to social enterprise and social procurement, and I'm going to tell you all about those things today. So similarly to that center of the donut, I think we can all acknowledge that our communities face multiple complex issues. These are often intersectional, things like social, economic, and that environmental. These are all connected. They range from things like employment gaps, skills training, historic and systemic racism, local economic disruption. I know alarm bells are going off with everyone in that area in particular right now. Youth disengagement and social isolation, to name a few. At the same time, governments, businesses, institutions buy a lot of things. It's estimated, as Jigar shared, that the federal government and the government in Canada purchases $20 billion in goods and services annually. And what this purchasing looks like ranges widely. Things like building maintenance and cleaning, professional services, food services, translation, the list goes on. And with $180 billion of implemented and planned infrastructure development over 12 years, we're seeing that a huge volume of spend is happening when it comes to construction. And that's why that's a key area of social procurement that I'm going to explore as well. Now, conventionally, purchasing has been done with a focus on risk mitigation and really about what's the best economic value we can get. So yourselves as purchasers, you work to acquire the goods and services that your organizations needs to operate. You work with suppliers and negotiate a price, and that is done conventionally with a focus on economic value. But with social procurement, we're tweaking that equation a little bit. We're still looking at what are the goods and services that you need. We're still working with suppliers, but we're adding a social value consideration to our decision-making process. So instead of just creating economic value, we're working to create community value as well. I'm going to get into what that means shortly. Because every single purchase has an economic, cultural, environmental, and social impact, whether you intend those impacts or not. And so when we focus, oh, that's my posture correction that I haven't figured out how to turn off. Sorry about that, but a reminder for us all to sit up straight. When we focus on best value for money, procurement is much more than a financial transaction. Procurement becomes a tool for building healthy communities. So what is a healthy community? What is community value? We conceptualize that with this community capital model. Best value for money considers more than economic transaction. It works to create community capital. So community capital is comprised of 5 different types of capital that communities need to be healthy and to thrive. So economic capital still needs to play a role. We still need income, finances, flow of resources. We're not going back to a barter system. It's incredibly inefficient. But we also need to think about how does the physical capital shape our environment and our communities. So this is the built environment and the natural environment. And I think we're seeing, these things are so important. We think about physical infrastructure in Canada right now. We think about housing. We think about a lot of our other infrastructure, hospitals, roads, a lot of things that need to be updated and increased in order to support our growing population. But the environmental capital around us too is also important. How are we affected by extreme weather and changes in the environment from climate change? We need to think about cultural capital. How can we cultivate opportunity for diversity and respect through our purchasing, for different voices and perspectives to be celebrated and heard? Next is human capital. This is the skills, learning, and training that individuals can access to better support themselves as well as their community. And last but not least is social capital. These are the networks, the relationships, the connections that create a healthy, thriving community. This creates community resiliency and well-being, and we have those networks of support and connection. And so you can see here that if we focus only on economic capital and the built environment, physical capital, and with conventional procurement, we may not be adding and cultivating these other types of capital that are so important. And so with social procurement, we're really shifting our mindset to valuing these other types of capital and thinking about how we can increase them through our purchasing choices with the same spend and still acquiring the goods and services that we need. So we've got some incredible data here on local procurement, and local has often been a part of a strategy area of social procurement programs, but now this is so front of mind in everybody's purchasing right now when we think about how we can respond to the economic attacks from the US. So this data is interesting because it looks at a construction project working with local suppliers versus multinational corporations. And they found that on $1 million contract, local suppliers created 3.6 jobs compared to 1.8 to 2.0 jobs when working with multinationals. So effectively doubling the number of jobs just by working with local suppliers. And this research into the economic multiplier effect really looks into those ripple effects of a purchasing choice. So spending the same $100 with a local independent office supply business means that $63 recirculates and stays and multiplies within your local economy. It goes towards paying people locally, the profits stay local, more likely to purchase from other local businesses and stay and have that opportunity to recirculate. Whereas if you spend that $100 with a multinational corporation that still has a brick and mortar store, only $14 is reinvested locally, and that rest of that money leaves immediately. So it doesn't have that chance to recirculate. So we can see here that there's some pretty strong data to back up why we're buying local. And now we have the added motivation that we're seeking to respond from tariff attacks. So there's a couple of wins that we can have there when we start to think about how we can create that supply chain resiliency and support our local economies. Another area of social procurement is purchasing from social enterprises. So this is the definition that's internationally aligned that BiSocial Canada certifies organizations who meet this definition. So a social enterprise is a business, sells goods and services, has a defined social, cultural, or environmental purpose, and then the majority of profits are reinvested into that purpose. And so this is a key part at the end because there's a lot of great businesses there with purpose. We see that is a really growing trend. But really that commitment that the money is going to stay with the mission differentiates social enterprises. About 85% of our certified social enterprises are actually nonprofits operating businesses, which takes a lot for people to be like, oh, how can you be a nonprofit and operating business? And it's really about transforming what we expect a business to be. And so many social enterprises do incredible work. They support people facing barriers to employment. A lot do supportive employment, so people with mental health issues or addictions who are not going to fit in the traditional labor market. They provide them that opportunity, that space to build their economic capital, their social capital, their human capital, and it can be so impactful. So I've got an incredible video here of a social enterprise in action that's going to speak a lot more eloquently than I could.
Economic development really needs to be inclusive. I was in Vancouver, living in Strathcona, which is part of the downtown East Side area, and what I saw were a lot of people who didn't work, but they had the capacity and ability to work. So I became involved in a community organizing process. In one of our meetings, there was a man, he said to me, what we really need in this neighborhood is a temp labor company that cares about the people, and it should be a nonprofit because you can pay us better and you could help us get full-time work maybe. You know what? That's what we do today. It was like the light went on in my head. This could be a very elegant solution to kind of a complex problem. We got support from, Van City Community Foundation, Vancouver Foundation, and after about 5 years, we started Embers Staffing Solutions. Embers is a community economic development corporation. We run a social enterprise, so it's creating an economic model specifically to fit people where they're at. We would go to companies and we'd say, we can solve your business problems on site. You need labor. We will manage all your HR. And also, if you find a good worker here, we'll pay for their training as well. Last year, we employed 2,000 people. Michael Dick, I think he was 6 months clean and sober, living in a halfway house. He was looking for a job and nobody would hire him. We were able to get him a job the very next day, actually. And Neil was somebody who is, suffering depression a lot. He'd come in and say, I feel somehow that work is my therapy. He had phoned me first. He said, the company wants to put me back into school to become a project manager. Do you think I should do this? And I said, are you kidding me? Of course, you go for it. It is so heartwarming. Businesses are starting to see that they can contribute to social good. This is good for people who need a second chance. This is great for the companies that need temporary workers, and it's great for society. I think this is the way of the future, is doing business for good.
I love that video. It's so inspiring. And Embers is doing incredible work in Vancouver and in Edmonton. And there's a lot of great social enterprises in the construction industry, that, as I mentioned, is a big opportunity area. So here we can see an example of Building Up. So Building Up works with people facing barriers to employment and provides them with supportive opportunities to train and develop into the construction sector. And so an organization that prioritized contracting with social enterprises is Toronto Community Housing Corporation. So they're a social housing provider in Toronto, and they had a policy where they wanted to prioritize working with contractors who employed the residents who lived in their housing. So really thinking like, okay, if our goal is to support residents, let's make that part of our procurement process as well. And so Building Up, providing that skills training, has a longstanding partnership with Toronto Community Housing Corporation, where they do a lot of their renovations in their projects, and they report and they track on their spend with TCHC, but then also with resident employees. And so I think this data is from last year, but within that time period, the contracts have led to $1.4 million in direct wages to TCHC residences. And so it's incredible to see that like strategic alignment for TCHC to go from, okay, this is our mandate, is to support people with housing, but then to put that into their procurement practice and find that social enterprise to partner with and purchase from. So if you're looking for a social enterprise in your area for the goods and services that you purchase, Buy Social Canada certifies social enterprises across the country. We have a free directory on our website that you can access to see what's out there. And there's so many in the construction. That's definitely a big area. So if you're if you're in Vancouver, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Toronto, Ottawa, St. John's, check it out and like really see maybe there's an opportunity to incorporate those types of construction social enterprises. And they don't just work in construction, they sell all different types of goods and services. So please check out that directory. And it might be that you know a social enterprise that isn't certified. In which case I encourage you to invite them to become certified. We've got about 250 on our directory, and it's estimated there's about 40,000 at least across the country. So there's a lot out there who are really focused on serving their community. You think about a lot of the thrift stores that you have in your community, arts communities, like community theater companies, nonprofit childcare businesses. Like these are things that we aren't surprised to see nonprofits operating businesses in, but maybe you'd be surprised to see them doing things like selling artisanal chocolates, and so many great things like that. So please check them out and consider prioritizing them within your supply chain. So we can see that social procurement as a movement is really growing across the country. When I started in 2019, so about 5 years ago, at Buy Social Canada, we were still at that phase where a lot of organizations were thinking, okay, what is social procurement? Are we allowed to do this within the trade agreements for the public sector? You know, why should we do this? What is it? And we've, in that time, seen so much growth and development. So the federal government in 2021 passed a Treasury Board directive that allowed them to look at socioeconomic benefits as part of seeking best value within their procurement. So that was huge. Following that, Public Service and Procurement Canada launched their social procurement policy. And we've seen different approaches across the federal government kind of grow over time. With that construction sector emphasis, there's a program called Community Employment Benefits that Infrastructure Canada operates on certain grant funding streams. I would say that municipalities have been and continue to really lead the charge. There's incredible work across the country with all sorts of municipalities with different approaches to social procurement. And we often see it starting from an exploration and then looking at, okay, what's our policy? Maybe some pilots and looking at different types of implementation. So could be things like putting evaluated criteria into bids, prioritizing spend with diverse suppliers, social enterprises, looking at major construction projects. There's a bunch of different approaches. And what I really am excited about now is now we're starting to have that reflection phase. So cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Halifax, who've been really at this for quite a while now, Winnipeg, are now saying, okay, like, what have we achieved so far? Where can we go from here? And that's what I'm really excited about, because social procurement is an iterative process. It isn't a checkbox and done. It's what have we accomplished so far? What have been the outcomes? And where can we continue to move the needle? And so that mindset of constant learning and iteration is really critical. Other types of organizations actively engaged in social procurement include institutions. So we heard about some housing organizations. Again, mandate really is strong to support people facing barriers. So incorporating that into their purchasing makes a lot of sense. We see the education sector exploring this quite a bit, York University, Simon Fraser University, to name a few. And then tourism is actually another major area where we see a lot of engagement. You know, tourism is having a moment since the pandemic where really seeing, okay, how do we ensure that tourism is done in a way that's benefiting our communities? You can have pretty damaging extractive tourism practices, but how can you have regenerative tourism practices that help support the local economy, help support the community vibrancy? And so we actually have an entire guide on social procurement in tourism, hospitality, and events to support that. And then in the private sector, we're definitely seeing lots happen. Private sector isn't beholden to trade agreement regulations, so there's a lot of flexibility in what can be done there. And as many organizations are thinking about, okay, what's our purpose? What is that competitive advantage that we provide to our clients, that added value? How do we differentiate ourselves and engage our employees? We're really seeing social procurement take off as an area there to help support those business goals. So for each of you thinking about social procurement, I invite you to reflect on this social procurement organization journey diagram. Clearly, my background in econ, I love a good model, so I've got a couple of those in here. And we show this journey as a network image because it's not linear. You're not going to do step 1, step 2, step 3, but you'll be wanting to incorporate these different elements at different times depending on what stage you're at, what work's been done previously, what your organization priorities are, and what your capacity is and what supports and resourcing you need to support you. And so that's why it's shown this way in this network diagram. The 6 components or elements of the journey include learn. By coming to this webinar, you're already on your learning journey here. And as I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you have that constant mindset of continuous learning and improvement. And then there's engage. So engage is about how social procurement breaks down silos. You know, we need to be making sure that we're working with our business client units, our executive leadership has buy-in, that we're supporting our procurement team and their needs on the processes that are developed. And then also with external stakeholders, you know, working with suppliers, community organizations, all of those different types of groups can be part of the development and implementation process. And then there's policy. So I encourage all of you, if you aren't already have social procurement in your policy, or if you do, make sure you read your policy. You know, what does it say about social value, community impact, environmental sustainability? Because that's really setting that direction. And then along with policy, we're going to talk about implementation frameworks and action plans that can support that policy into that action phase, where it's really about not just having words on a page, but what are we going to do about it? And as you start to act and implement and pilot, I encourage you to really make sure that you're collecting data and measuring along the way. So that's where measure comes in. You know, what have we achieved? What can we use? How can we use that data to reflect and learn and iterate so that we can be constantly working towards our community goals? And then lead is about sharing the story, really promoting social procurement as an organization value, as part of what your organization is contributing to community. And there's so many opportunities for leadership just by practicing a strong social procurement practice. So let's get into where the rubber hits the road. I'm really passionate about implementation because I care about social procurement making change, not just about doing the process. So we're going to look at a couple of different examples here. We're going to look at the City of Winnipeg has an overarching action plan, which we'll go through in a little bit of detail. That's kind of when we think about implementation, some of the options of what you could explore. Then we're going to look at unbundling. And when it comes to supporting local businesses, many diverse suppliers, so Black-owned businesses, Indigenous businesses, social enterprises, tend to be small businesses. They may not be used to engaging in the procurement process. They may not have the capacity for really large contracts. So unbundling and making smaller contracts that can fit the market capacity of those types of suppliers can be really helpful. We'll look at a couple more of those nonprofit direct award examples, similar to the Toronto Community Housing one. And then we'll look at that big construction opportunity area, which by Social Canada uses the term community benefit agreements, and we'll touch on what that means in that section. So the city of Winnipeg has had sustainable procurement in their policy since, I want to say, about 2008, 2009. And Bisocial Canada began working with them about 4 years ago. And they have 4 pillars for their sustainable procurement program, which includes ethical, social, Indigenous, and the environment. And so council had come and said, you've been working on this for quite a while now, about over 10 years. What have you accomplished? And so it was about really, okay, how do we move from policy into deeper, more meaningful action? And engagement was a big priority for the city of Winnipeg. So we worked with a large working group with internal and external stakeholders, as well as 4 external specific working groups to develop an action plan that would meet the community context and really put sustainable procurement forward. So I know you can't read this, it's very small, but what it's meant to show is that at the top, we've got the city's vision. So these are the things that the high-level strategies across their organization, things that they want to achieve for their community. So things like develop an equitable, diverse, and inclusive community and remove systemic barriers. Increase environmental responsibility and resilience through Indigenous knowledge, natural resource preservation, renewal, enhancement, and reuse. These are things that most organizations are like, yeah, these are things we want to achieve. And then what's the beauty of this process is the next step is how do we ground those into tangible things we can ask for and measure within our procurements? So here they look at social, Indigenous, and environmental specific goals or objectives. So things like increase employment of equity groups, increase in organizations paying living wage, increase energy efficiency, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see we go from high level to tangible. And then the next area is the sustainable procurement mechanisms, or we sometimes use the term tactics. So this is looking at, okay, how is the regulatory environment for your organization? There's often thresholds for certain dollar values of purchasing. The public sector has requirements for open competitive purchasing above a certain threshold. And so really, how do you fit within that regulatory the regulatory environment, different types of mechanisms, and then there can be ones that are across dollar value amounts as well. So I'll get into those in a little bit more. And then across all of this, we want to have those reporting metrics. So what are the things that we're measuring to assess the program, to assess the bid outcomes, and so that across the program, we can see how have we contributed to our vision? How are we doing? Have we moved the needle? Okay, we haven't. That's okay too. That's a learning. Okay, what could we do differently? And that's where that engagement piece comes in. And there's so many of those components there. So you can view this, if you look up City of Winnipeg Sustainable Procurement, you can view the whole action plan in detail on their website. But I just wanted to walk you through the flow of how Bisocial Canada works with organizations to develop a program or a strategy type of thing. So what are the different mechanisms that the City of Winnipeg developed? So the first was below threshold purchases, sometimes called P-card or credit cards. This is when you've got a large number of folks who have the discretion to buy below a certain threshold. And so oftentimes that purchasing is done with a focus on price and familiar suppliers. Okay, got to get it done, whatever's easy, quick. And so what we develop is, okay, what is some other direction that we can provide to folks as well as support and resources? So that can be things like, okay, we want to prioritize certain types of businesses, social enterprises, local businesses, Black-owned businesses, small businesses. And then what resources can we provide to purchasers on how to find those businesses? So things like Bisocial Canada's Social Enterprise Directory, and there are many other directories, and sometimes organizations work to create their own internal ones as well. The next mechanism is looking at RFX questionnaires. So this is looking at, okay, we're going to ask the same question, so a standard questionnaire across our bidders. And so that means for the evaluator, and when you're in the bid design process, you don't have to think about, okay, what should we put in this bid? For the bidder, they don't have to, they can create their response once and then only change it if their answers change. That standard questionnaire format we first worked and developed with the City of Calgary, and it's been super impactful there. They now include it on, I think, about 90% of their RFPs and RFXs. The next mechanism that we worked on with the City of Winnipeg is the social value menu. So this is a set of different clauses that can be included around employment requirements, training requirements, subcontracting requirements, environmental specifications that can be picked and chosen depending on what is being purchased. And that's really focused on, okay, we're going to have some measurement of what happens on this specific bid. And then the next one that's developed is set aside contracts for Indigenous businesses and social enterprises. So in alignment with the city's reconciliation objectives and goals, and support for their large social enterprise sector, they have the allowance within the public trade agreements to have set aside contracts for Indigenous businesses and then those nonprofit direct awards for above threshold with social enterprises. So we developed guidance and tools to support that for staff. Now, on the questionnaire side, what I want to show you and highlight here is that it really can be supportive of measurement, as I talked about. So because they have that standard questionnaire and they ask these questions in a yes/no format on each one, and they often require evidence so that it's not, again, just a checkbox, they get data on all of their bidders, what all of their bidders are doing, and what all of their successful proponents are doing. And so that means that if you gather up all that data from across the bidding pool, you can start to see, okay, who are we working with? What are they delivering on? So you can see this data shows the different bidders. So it looks like there was some transfer of slides back and forth here, and the numbers at the end changed. But if the total is 13, you can see that those are percentages of that. But you can see that a lot of the bidders are doing inclusive employment of equity groups or paying living wage. But a very small portion are social enterprise certified or Indigenous business certified or reporting and tracking their social procurement. So that's really helpful to get a sense of who are you working with, what are they delivering on in alignment with our community goals. So the next area I'm going to look at is part of the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative. This was launched in March 2019 after 3 years of development on Vancouver Island. It started with coastal communities focusing on small rural communities that wanted to have a collaborative and regional approach to share access to resources and learning. So recognizing they wouldn't all have the resource to contract with a consultant like Biosocial Canada, but that they could share learnings amongst each other with this network approach. It expanded to be BC-wide in 2021, and we now have over 30 members of local governments and institutions in BC. If you're part of the public sector in BC, local government or institution, please reach out if you're interested in joining. It's a fantastic way to access a wealth of resources and information at a very low value. So since we've been operating BCSBI, we've gathered a tremendous amount of case studies that you can find on our website. So all different types of scenarios around all different areas of social procurement are available to learn from there. And it's definitely been one of the strong areas of social procurement, of delivery of BCSBI, is really seeing those case studies and learning tangibly what could happen. So I'm going to share one of those today that focused on unbundling. And I know folks, especially procurement folks, we want to make sure that we're differentiating unbundling from contract splitting. Contract splitting to avoid your procurement thresholds is illegal, and you cannot do that. So unbundling really has to be about what are distinct parts that could be grouped together or could be separated. So in this scenario, it was a streetscape that the District of Tofino was working on. And they knew that the project was going to be too complex for local contractors, and that most of the resources would not come locally. But there were a few things that could come locally. And so that's when they started to ask about, okay, how can we ensure that local businesses and employers who are capable of doing some of these pieces of work have an opportunity to bid? So with the landscape and bundle, they've identified that there are about 3 to 4 local companies that could potentially bid on the project. What they did was they worked really intentionally and provided education and support for those companies to bid, because many of them, they hadn't responded to district procurements before. So they sent them the bid opportunity. They hosted some meetings and educational opportunities for them to understand what it would entail. And one of those local suppliers did successfully win the bid. And because they were locally based, they didn't have to pay for travel, because Tofino is a very remote community. They didn't have to pay for travel, and so the overall project costs were actually reduced. They were able to support local equipment, and then they also had the ongoing maintenance contract was able to be done through the supplier as well. For the general contractor, this was fine. They were going to subcontract for that work anyways, and so we know that that's very common with a lot of general contractors. You know, there's so many pieces that they will subcontract out to. So where are those opportunities to align those contract portions with what the market capacity for their local community is done. And so now when they have a large capital project at the district, we really look at, okay, where are the opportunities and resources locally, and how can we ensure that the procurements are structured in a way that can be approachable to those organizations. So I mentioned the nonprofit direct awards before, and this is something that private sector, anyone can direct award. You don't have to go through the process. But in the public sector, I really want to highlight this as an opportunity, if any folks here, that you have this allowance within the trade agreements. And so really looking at what your procurement policy states so that you can prioritize building contractual relationships with nonprofits. These often start small, you know, okay, let's do a small pilot, let's test, let's make sure that there's effective delivery, that it works well, and then it can increase over time. So we see housing organizations, municipalities really engaging in this, and it's such a great opportunity for these social enterprises who are doing so much to support the community, but it really streamlines the procurement process for them if they can build on a successful relationship and do a direct award instead of a competitive bid. All right, so I've been teasing on this section for quite a while. So community benefit agreements is about a legal agreement or contractual requirement on construction, infrastructure, and development projects for specific social value outcomes such as hiring, training, apprenticeships, and procurement that ensures projects enhance social, cultural, environmental, and economic opportunities for and with community. So really about taking these big projects and recognizing that there are all these kind of opportunity areas that can be leveraged to support and create community benefits. Last year, Bisocial Canada launched a new guide. So as a social enterprise, we put a lot of our intellectual property out for free in resources so anyone can learn from them. This builds on over about 10 to 15 years of work in CBAs, and we really outline our approach to creating a community benefits process. So the first area that we talk about in the guide is mandate. Where is the authority to carry out a policy or course of action that directs the inclusion of community benefits on a project? So we look at policy development, council directions, bid requirements, things like that. Design is the process to engage, determine, and incorporate appropriate goals and targets for community benefits on a project. So what are you going to try to achieve? What is there going to be a target? How will that be structured? All of that goes into the design process. And then implement is about the activities and process that are needed for community benefits to be realized on a project. So what is the support needed to go to the general contractors, the subcontractors, work with local employment organizations, collect the data, report it out, apply learnings? All of that happens in the implement stage. So Bisocial Canada has experience working on all of those stages, and we offer services as a CBA liaison support. So we really look at designing a policy. How can we reflect your organization's key objectives, desired outcomes, and your procurement processes? We look at what are we hearing from the community and different stakeholders, suppliers, the construction industry, and so on, and what's going to be an appropriate bid process for that to be developed in. And then once that's kind of policy and mandate is set, we can work to design and implement specific targets on the project. So what are going to be those objectives and desired outcomes? We work on, when it comes to the implementation, we work with suppliers to project what is going to be needed for procurement and for employment, and then how we're going to collect and report on that data. We host things like employment opportunity meetings, supplier trade shows, and all sorts of different things to build that supportive ecosystem to identify those relationships so that they can lead to those community benefits. And we work with teams and provide them orientation and training because this is a new area in the construction sector for most folks. So we really help provide that support. So I'm going to share a case study of the City of Vancouver CBA policy. This policy applies to new developments that are over a certain size, and they are then required to have local and equity employment. So 10% of project workforce is an equity deserving group and residing locally, and 10% local procurement and 10% social procurement. Social Canada is providing our liaison services for the new St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, where we're contracted by PCL Construction to operate and to deliver that implementation support. And so we've been working on this project for about 3-4 years now, and we're really, really proud of the work that's being done there. So within this project, the most recent data has about 12% of new employees are identifying as both equity deserving and within the neighborhoods surrounding the project. We can see that about 43% identify as an equity seeking group, which is fantastic. So we work to support that data collection and tell the story of what's being achieved on that project. For local procurement, we see 17% of the project spent to date is being spent within the city core, 58% within the broader Metro Vancouver, and then 24% outside of BC. So we can see where the money is going on the spend on this massive project through this target and this reporting process. On the social procurement side, we're seeing 9% is going towards social enterprises, social impact businesses, and equity seeking owned businesses. Folks might think, oh no, we're not meeting the target. Remember, this is new, like this is a learning. It's okay if this is your first, second, third project that you might not meet the target, but you're going through the process, you're educating, you're trying, you're learning. And the City of Vancouver has a requirement that the developer has to show best effort. So what is everything that you have tried to work towards that target? So it's, even though we're not meeting the target, we're still working towards it, and we're recognizing that, you know, there's going to be a lot of constraints in the construction sector too, where we were working with a lot of multinational corporations, big businesses that might not meet these definitions, and that's okay. It's about creating that opportunity and incentive so that more of those construction social enterprises can grow and develop, and that we can help address some of the challenges in the construction sector around labor shortages and so on. So that's a lot of information I've shared about different areas of social procurement, but hopefully I've sparked some interest in what you can do next on your social procurement journey. If you'd like to learn more, we have tons of tools and resources freely available on our website as part of our mission to grow social procurement across the country. So I invite you to explore and learn and reach out if there's anything in particular that you'd like to learn about and you can't find easily. And then as a business, we offer paid support and services, including a really awesome annual membership program that's high value, low cost. It's $3,000 for a year. You get access to exclusive webinars, 5 hours of consulting, a webinar just for your team, and a spot on our professional certificate program. Our professional certificate program is an 8-hour online course that really runs through, okay, what do you need to know to start to put social procurement into practice at your organization? And our next one is going to be starting in May. And then we offer in-depth consulting services, so policy design, implementation frameworks, measurement and tools. If there's any area that you're looking for additional support on, please reach out and we'd be happy to have a conversation. For the next steps in your journey, I invite you to think about where you'd like to go from here. Would you like to look at engaging and discussing with folks from your team or other teams at your organization or externally? Do you want to learn more and access some of the training that I've talked about? Do you want to look at your policy? Do you want to set a baseline and see where you're at currently with different types of suppliers? Do you want to pilot and look at prioritizing social enterprises for your low dollar value spend or something similar? And if you want to lead, please reach out to us and we'd love to explore different ways for you to really showcase yourselves as social procurement champions. I'm going to wrap by busting a myth that the social procurement journey is straightforward and linear. As we've talked about a lot, it is complex and iterative. It's going to require changes in policy, practice, and culture, but it can have incredible impact on communities, so it's worth it. I look forward to hearing any questions from the group. In the meantime, please subscribe to our monthly newsletter. You can do so by clicking on the QR code shown here. And my email is there as well, tori@biosocialcanada.com. I would love to connect if anybody has any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for such an incredible session on social procurement, Tori. I'm sure every one of us have a lot of questions around knowing social procurement better and how we can adapt these in our own companies. And it's definitely not just a buzzword. It's a game changer to how organizations approach procurement, right? So yeah, so now we would be moving ahead with the Q&A session. We have people dropping in questions already, so that's great. Please continue to submit your questions through the Q&A tool, and we still have about 10 minutes, so we'll be able to answer as many as we can. Before we begin, Tori, on the next slide, we would also have a QR code for getting your feedback. So please scan it using your mobile phone, which just take 2 minutes to complete the feedback survey for this session. And this would help us in improving future events and tailor content to what matters most to you. Okay, with that, we'll start off with our first question that we have from Philip, and he would want to know how to implement and score social procurement in a bid evaluation and how to rally for cooperation support versus best price.
These are great questions. Thanks, Philip. So when it comes to implementing social procurement in a bid, you want to think about what are we trying to accomplish on our bid? What are we trying to support for the community? So when we're developing kind of higher level policy objectives across the organization, we look at what is your organization's priorities? Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have a business plan that states anything that says, we want to prioritize environmental sustainability, greenhouse gas reduction, or do we want to prioritize Indigenous reconciliation or support for our local businesses and small businesses? Look for those existing strategic documents to help provide that guidance. And then when it comes to a specific bid, really think about, okay, what are we purchasing here and where is the aligned opportunity with some of those priorities? So are you buying something that is for sale by social enterprises or Indigenous businesses? Is it something where there's maybe employment opportunities or apprenticeship opportunities? So we actually have a tool called the Social Value Menu for goods and services on our website that walks through some of the types of bid questions that you can ask. You can ask yes, no with evidence-based questions that allow kind of saying like, do you do this? Yes or no? Clear and easy for evaluating. Or you can ask more descriptive and open questions, tell us about how you do XYZ. And then you just want to make sure you're working with your evaluation team to have consistency in how those answers are evaluated, because you could have, one organization sponsors a playground, one organization is an Indigenous business. Okay, how do we evaluate those in a transparent and consistent way? So hopefully that helps in that first question. And we do go through evaluation quite a bit in our professional certificate course and have some hands-on activities to support that. And then your second question for corporate support, again, look at those strategic directions. What are the existing commitments that you've said you already do? And then really advertising that that you can deliver on those with procurement. And then I think we're all seeing, lowest price is not always best value. Going back to my economics thinking, we always try like externalities, but we're all collectively paying the price for those externalities somewhere. So when we think about really thinking about what is the impact our organization wants to have on our communities, on our economies, how can we bring that into alignment? And it's not going to be, every single thing you're going to be able to buy in Canada from a social enterprise. We know that's not possible. So make sure that you're doing this in increments. Walk before you run. Focus on building some small success stories that you can then use to gather momentum on. And many suppliers are already doing great things. They've just never been asked about them. So ask the question, ask about Indigenous businesses in your supply chain, ask about ones that provide supportive employment or have accessibility programs. And then you can start to see, okay, where are we at currently and how can we move the needle a bit further?
That's great advice, Tori. And I really like the part when you talked about the tool. So I think a lot of the joinees today can really help and benefit from that tool and understand how can the implementation work. Just a follow up on that. Do you think with the generative AI space evolving so fast, is it going to be easier for professionals and for organizations to be more involved in social procurement? How can they leverage new technologies for social procurement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm still navigating how AI fits into social procurement personally. I think I'm definitely still getting my head around it, but it also can pose a threat too. We've heard about suppliers submitting responses that are generated by AI. So, okay, how are we verifying what's being submitted? So I think it's going to be a big area of exploration, and I think you have to have a crystal ball to know the answer at this point, how it's all going to shake out. Jigar, I don't know if you saw there was one more question in the chat.
Yes. Yeah. So Alan is asking what is the required for a social enterprise to be certified? So how do we go about that?
Yeah, that's great. So there's an application form on our website, and then we review the incorporation documents and the financials to see, okay, you're selling, you want a majority or a large portion of your revenue for the entity to come from the sale of goods and services. So they are operating a business. They have to have stated in their incorporation documents what their mission or purpose is. And then we have to see that baked into their incorporation documents that they're reinvesting the majority or all of any net profits or surplus. So nonprofits, no shareholders are getting profits, so that's a checkbox there. When it comes to hybrid incorporation, which is what BiSocial Canada is, we still have shareholders, but in our incorporation documents, it clearly states that if we were to ever pay dividends, which we never have and don't plan to our shareholders, 60% in our case has to go back into our mission. And if the company were ever to sell, then 60% would have to go into the mission. So really securing over time that money stays with the mission. And a great example that I give often that folks can often reflect on is Tom's Shoes. So Tom's Shoes, very popular in the teens there around a buy one, give one model. You bought a pair of Tom's shoes, they gifted one to somebody in developing nations. Hugely popular, hugely fashionable. People may have been really motivated by that purpose, by that mission, by that added value. Tom sold Tom's shoes and pocketed the entire amount and had no obligation to ensure that the mission that the brand was built on received some of that benefit. So there's a lot of great organizations out there, social purpose businesses, B corporations who are doing great work, and they have an important role to play in this, but they just need to be differentiated from businesses who will ensure that the asset that they're creating, the value that their business creates, will continue to support that mission in perpetuity.
Nice. Thank you for touching on that, Tori. A follow-up on that as well. Like in public sector, there is incentives and there's policy supporting public sector for social procurement, right? In private sector, you gave a really good example of a shoe company. Are there any other incentives? Like I understand Gen Z and newer generation is more incentivized and is more looking forward to purchasing products from the companies that are doing social good. So that's definitely one. Are there any other incentives for the folks working in private sector that they should be looking at when they adapt social procurement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that in addition to the ones you've mentioned, is that a lot of their clients might be asking for this too. If you're selling to the public sector, they might be saying, "Hey, what are you doing for social procurement?" So I think that's an important one when it comes to the competitive advantage. I think another piece is similar to Tom's Shoes is if your organization has a purpose, if you have community commitments, if you've said this is important to you, and part of that is an employee attraction and stakeholder engagement, this is a way to really put your purpose into practice. Really show tangibly, we've spent this much with Indigenous businesses in the past year. We've spent this much with social enterprises. This is what our supply chain has created. And by working with different suppliers, you also help to create supply chain resiliency and find some new suppliers that you might not have been exposed to before.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think we are right on the time. And so we are at the end of our time for the Q&A there. Thank you so much. And I would like to take this moment to extend a huge thank you to Tori for sharing her expertise and inspiring us to think differently about procurement. Let's give her a virtual round of applause, everyone. And of course, a big thank you to all of you joining today and engaging in this important conversation. We hope you're walking away with new insights and actionable ideas on how to implement social procurement in your organization. As mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording and slides. A feedback survey link would also go along with it. And you would also get updates on the upcoming Supply Chain Canada events. If today's session sparked ideas, let's keep the conversation going. Connect with Tori Williamson on LinkedIn. Connect with me, Jigar Kanjani, on LinkedIn. Follow Supply Chain Canada in LinkedIn page for more such interesting events. And you can also check our official website, which is supplychaincanada.com/events. Stay resilient, stay connected, and let's use procurement as a force for good. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Take care and see you at the next one. Goodbye. Everyone's dropping out.
Fantastic. We'll go to the debrief then.
Yes. Yeah. We'll switch over to the debrief.
I'll jump there. Thank you.